Hi, good morning, everyone, and thank you for joining our Leading Your International School and TAR Services webinar today. We are joined today by Warren Cook. He has over 25 years of experience in HR, and he is the Chief of HR Advisory Services at TAR Services and co-author of our book, Leading Your International School. Today, Warren will be delivering a webinar on preparing for your next international school interview. He will provide detailed strategies, do's and don'ts, as well as some examples throughout this session. If you have any questions, please leave them in the chat box, or we'll open to the floor for a Q&A session by the end of each topic. And we appreciate, if you can leave your cameras on throughout the session, that will be appreciated. Thank you. Warren, I'll hand over to you.
Great, thanks. So thank you so much, Jane. Glad to be here. Excited to walk through this presentation. And again, Rick, with you and our audience here, we certainly welcome you to open the mic. At the end of every slide, I generally will ask if you have any questions, since it's a small group. That way, if you want to cover anything that I go through in each slide, we can do that. But yep, we're going to talk about interview preparation today. I'm going to do a little bit of an introduction, which we just had about me. I've been in the HR space for 27 years. I probably hired and interviewed thousands of people. I've authored a book on applicant interview preparation, practical coaching for today. So that book was designed to help the applicant navigate the crazy world of the hiring and talent acquisition that's been going on. I have experience both in corporate, in private, in public sector, in government, from a consulting perspective, from an external perspective, internal HR, leadership. So I've kind of seen every staffing firm, talent acquisition. So I've seen every angle and every position as far as how people get into organizations, how they navigate the process successfully or unsuccessfully, and then what the organization's doing on the other side. So that's really my goal today, is to kind of get through that. And so my goal is really to pass along practical experience, and my goal for you is to share that wisdom with you. Make sure you get perspective from somebody who's been on both sides of the table. As an IO psychologist, I study workplace behavior. And so I really like going through examples and interacting and finding what problems or challenges people have faced, what questions have been difficult, where they get stumbled, or what they feel prevents them from being really successful through that interview process. And then I also do some level setting and realistic checks that the world today is very different than 10, 15, 20 years ago from an applicant pool perspective, but we'll talk about that. And then I'm really here to answer your questions, right? My goal is to really make sure that during the session, if you have questions along the lines of interviewing, the interview process, talent acquisition from the applicant side, we can go through and answer those questions for you. And now flipping it around, why I'm hoping you're in attendance today, why I'm hoping you're here, is that you're looking to enhance your skills, right? And so I'm hoping you're looking to improve how you can secure interviews. Once you secure them, that you are able to get that job offer. I want to make sure that you can learn skills to articulate your value really effectively during the interview process. And most importantly, empower you to give the ability on how you differentiate. Because in this day and age, there may be 20 very qualified applicants. So two things are really dependent on your success: how well you articulate and how well you differentiate. It doesn't matter. Two people might have 10 years experience. Two people might have the same degree, same education, same background experience on paper, but one who articulates and differentiates usually has an opportunity to go a little further. And so we're going to cover the interview process first. We're going to go kind of through the interview process, and then we're going to talk through various other topics through the life cycle. Then we're going to deep dive into the interview itself, strategies for it, how you differentiate, how you articulate, and then some final strategies and tips, including how you should do on if it's a remote video interview. But I want to call out, since you did show up here today, Rick. You asked a question when you registered. And you asked for tips for senior leadership positions and what are international schools looking for in a senior leader. So it's very difficult to answer that question for the school, because each organization, even if they had the same exact job description, may be looking for different things in that applicant. And so a lot of what I'm going to walk through today, and a lot of what I'm going to share and teach, is about how do you uncover what those needs are of the role, and making sure you understand, anybody, you is being used in general here, anybody understands that the interview process should be two-sided. It's not just a question from the employer you answer and then you leave, right? It should be an interactive process. I teach employers to control the process. I teach applicants to control the process so that they have this, coming together where both sides are getting information to make a decision. They're going to make a decision whether you're a fit. I want to make sure you're armed with a decision of whether you'd even want to work for an organization. And there's things that can happen in an interview that can really cause you to say, wait a minute, this isn't anywhere I actually want to work.
Okay.
So, yeah, sure. So I'd like you to think about, both of you, Jane, as well. Think about these questions, right? Is the interview process, just the process itself, just holistically, is it an inclusive process in your opinion or an exclusive process? And I will call out either of you, but what do either of you think about just the interview process in general? To you, is it inclusive or exclusive?
I think it depends.
Right?
I think it depends on the context sometimes. Sometimes it feels, just from my side of the table, it feels inclusive, but at times it feels rather exclusive. I get again, it's contextual. I mean, it should be inclusive, but it doesn't always feel that way.
Sure. And in your opinion, what's the purpose of an organization even conducting an interview? Why don't they look at your resume, call you and say, here's your money, start tomorrow? Right? I mean, that doesn't happen. So in your opinion, why do they even conduct an interview?
I think it's to see if you're an appropriate fit, if there's a match between, they want to know, is this somebody I want to work with? And likewise on my side, is this an organization I want to be a part of?
Sure. Great. Mick, thanks for joining us today. Welcome. Yeah,
I think it's also to get a mutual understanding of, what they want. And then if everything translates from your resume or CV.
Sure. No, great point. So thank you both for adding to that. So when I think about this, and this is Warren Cook's professional opinion, I've only done this 27 years, so it's just my opinion, but the interview process is intentionally and designed as an exclusive process. At no point does an organization get 1,000 applications and say, yay, let's bring them all in, right? If you think about the pool of applicants, okay, and by the way, context was right, Rick. I'm not talking about like diversity, inclusion, being inclusive. Like this is about the process, like just the process, right? And so you've got all these applicants in this funnel, and a lot of them apply. They might not even have the experience. So from a process perspective, you get all these people in the pool, and generally the technology excludes a bunch of them, right? It'll ask some questions, the applicant tracking system, suddenly, half of them are excluded. And then it looks through questions. Maybe it prompts you for 4 or 5 questions. Maybe it says, do you have a degree? Have you taught for 10 years? Have you done this? And now it's slowly, that funnel is narrowing down that applicant pool to who's minimally qualified, who met those minimum qualifications. Then it goes hopefully to a first round interview. Maybe there's multiple rounds, maybe 2 or 3 rounds. But at the end of the day, you get this process where you're interviewing your finalist, and generally you hire that one person. So if you're one of these 1,000 applicants, if you go into the process thinking the company's trying to hire you, you're already setting yourself up for a negative experience. Instead, they're trying to exclude everyone who they can't, right? So if they can't exclude you because you hit all the check boxes, well, then you're going to get through the process. But they're trying to find, oh, they didn't have the degree. Oh, they didn't have enough experience. Oh, they didn't work in a school. Oh, they didn't work in this country, right? So they're narrowing it down, and ultimately they're going to hire one person in the role. And maybe it's a position like a teacher, we're hiring 2 or 3, but think of it as an exclusive process. And that's why philosophically for me, it's more important to differentiate from the first stage on, because if you're not differentiating from the beginning, you're losing out. You may be eliminated before you even get any further in the process. In fact, a computer system might eliminate you. So this is my thoughts on why I view the process as exclusive, not an employer or an organization, the process of talent acquisition or recruiting. Any thoughts on this before I go to the next slide? Good. Okay. So why do they do it though? Now, some of this is based on US regulations, but it is kind of consistent in a lot of countries. So they want to perform a consistent process, right? They want to make sure that what they're doing is consistent with each and every applicant, so that they're viewed as being fair through the process. If they just pulled up your resume and said, great, you're hired, I'm going to mail you a check, you start tomorrow, you know, they don't have the information that both of you alluded to earlier. They don't learn about you. Are you the right fit? All those things. In a lot of environments, if they have an applicant tracking system, some way you apply through technology, it allows an employer to gather all of the same information from somebody. Because I have yet to run into 2 resumes that are exactly the same. Because every human being's unique, their background, their experience is different. And so while they may ask for a resume, when you're filling out a web-based tool or system or an applicant tracking system or an online application process, you want to make sure you're very comprehensive in filling those out, because that's usually what they're looking at first, not the resume. When I go into a system and I screen applicants, I look at, did they answer all the questions right? Did they meet the qualifications? Were they flagged as good? Then I take a quick 30 to 60 second look at the resume, then I move on. And I'm boom on the next one, boom on the next one. So it is a way for them to get same information. And then the third bullet to both of your points that you mentioned earlier, Rick and Jane, is, they want to find that right fit, the most qualified, right? You've got this layering of who is minimally qualified, who met the qualifications we posted, and now out of that pool, who's the most qualified? Because if you want to hire top talent, that's really the group you're looking for, right? The ones that are above and beyond, the ones who just meet the qualifications. So in some countries, this might not be as critical from a regulatory or legal compliance perspective, but if you're applying for jobs in the US, everything is based on legal compliance of making sure there's a consistent process. And it just makes sense that you have some process to help with the decision-making. Any questions on this? I'll move on. Good. Okay. So the interview process, how do they do interviews? Okay. And this is like an intimidating group, right? You walk into a room and there are 4 people sitting there ready to rip you apart with their questions, and it looks intimidating. When I think of the interview process, I think a lot of individuals I've worked with over the years didn't know what was happening to them. And so to me, it's important to make sure that you really know what's happening at various stages of the process. Now, not every organization does this, and our webinar next week is to teach the employer side how they should properly handle a talent acquisition process for success. But there's a very different process when someone is screening applicants versus someone who's interviewing them. I'll give you an example. If you've ever applied for a position on the internet, you go online or a company's website and you apply and you don't hear back for 4 weeks. Has that ever happened? You don't hear back right away? Shocking, right? Well, one of the things that an organization may do, especially if their HR leadership is really focused on strategy, is before they start scheduling interviews of qualified people, they realize a month went by, right? 4 weeks passed. Not everybody that's a fit may still be even looking for a job. Maybe they found another job. Maybe they lost interest. Maybe they whatever, right? So a screen is when you get the call where someone calls you, usually it's an intern or a low-level HR professional generally, and will simply say, "Hi, Rick, how are you doing today? Great. Are you still looking for a job? Yes. Are you still interested in this position? Great. Are you still looking for this level of compensation? Great. Fantastic. We're going to be looking forward to scheduling you." Right? It's not really an interview. They're not asking you many questions. So know when that happens, it's a positive, but there's no information coming your way generally. Just be aware that that's kind of what's happening, that too much time has passed, that if they just start scheduling people, they'd be sending emails to people who lost interest in the company. What I'd encourage you to do anytime you have a screening type call is ask as many questions as you can from that person. They generally won't know all the answers, but you can say, when do you plan on scheduling interviews? What will the process be? Who was the hiring team? Like, try to get any information you can from them, because I view the interview process as mutual. They ask you questions, you should be able to ask them questions. They're making decisions about you, you make decisions about them. So you can start learning a lot about the process, the position, or the people there by asking these questions. If you were to ask the question, they go, "I can't give you any information. Thanks so much. I'll call you." Like, you already get a sense that, like, is this a really good communicating environment? What happens when I start working there, right? So you can pick up some things on there, but often that person has no real information to share, but you should ask. The phone interview, or now more people do video interviews. I think less and less organizations actually do a phone interview because now you have the ability to see everybody. Phone or video interview, generally there's going to be that first round, right? There'll be some first round interview. Organizations take 2 approaches to this. Either that first round is just going to be that human resources touch, right? That behavioral, that culture fit touch that has nothing to do with subject matter expertise. It's not a technical interview, right? They're not giving you technical information. And so that interview, you're going to approach that one way versus if you have the member of the board calling you, right, for the principal role or head teacher role, or if you have two of the principal and the assistant principal calling you for a job that you're replacing one of them, right? You know that's going to be more technical driven than just the HR person's interview. And so knowing who is interviewing you will change that, and know that these stages of the process are normal to do culture fit, then technical fit. When you do the first fit, then that's somebody's usually recommending to that team, this is somebody who should move forward. They kind of check the boxes. Now make sure they're the right skill set fit. So that's the normal process of a lot of organizations. And then the face-to-face or video could be a panel, could be one-on-one. I think it's a little weird when an organization puts you through 5 interviews and they're all one-on-one and they're all video interviews. And next thing you know, you had to explain who you are 5 times. Right. And inevitably you change your story at some point because you just can't remember verbatim what you said. And then this person's calling that person saying, did you hear what Rick said to me? We didn't say that to me. Maybe he's a liar. No, they just have a really bad process. I remember we used to have a team at J&J Pharmaceuticals. This team just always wanted to do it by themselves. And I said, we're done with that. We're going to sit in a room. It's going to take 1 hour and you're all going to meet with the candidate. Now the candidate had to say, hi, who I am once. And now you get more time actually asking questions. So, but that panel interview, that stage should really be participated by a decision maker, a hiring manager, maybe HR is there, maybe a subject matter expert, but that panel should have the skill sets to make the decision. Now, the higher the role, there may be another round. Sometimes that panel interview, so usually first round interview, panel interview, decision, or higher level roles, panel interview, recommendation to a true decision maker. The farther you are in an organization, the more likely it's going to be narrowing to just 2 or 3 people with that final decision maker. I will tell you that I think a lot of people hate panel interviews. It intimidates them. I love panel interviews. You can observe the employer. You can ask a question and watch other people's reactions, especially if they're good questions. You can get the, are we allowed to tell him that? Like, wait, what did he ask? Right? Like, I mean, you learn a lot about how they react, but also you don't have to worry about telling the same story different times. You get to answer the question, engage, share that story, share that information. And like I said, multiple rounds. Try to find out as early in the process as you can how many rounds they're planning for. Nothing is worse when I would coach applicants when they say, I had my panel interview, it's great, I can't wait. And then they go, they just told me there's 2 more rounds. Like, how deflating, right? It's not as deflating if you set the expectation and you know, right? So any question on kind of the ways they go about doing it, Rick? Anything on this that I can answer for you?
No, I think what you said sums up my experience. I've had, it's a guessing game sometimes how many rounds there are. And sometimes you need to do 2 rounds online and then you need to, they want to fly you out there for a face-to-face. And then it's a whole different kind of field you're dealing with. So it varies.
I will share with you my personal perspective on this. When I find out organizations have, I just talked to a person I was coaching last week. She's in her 5th round for just a marketing director role at a university, 5th round. She said, what do you think, Warren, is going on? I said, that what's going on is there's no decision maker and they're not sure what they want. That's what's going on. You never have that many rounds involving that many people. Imagine when you get that job, how many bosses you're going to have, how many meetings you're going to go to just to get anything done, right? So it's very telling, but you learn that through the process. So I'm going to take a little bit and talk about finding the right opportunity and making sure, you think about this and you're evaluating this, and not just for whatever job you might be looking for now, but anytime in your career, and share this with family or friends, right? Like, how do they go about finding the right role for them? So they should think about, what school are they looking at if they're looking for an international school and they're looking to work at a school. So did they look at the position details? Did they look at the scope of the role? If you go online and look at posted positions, you will see very differentiating job descriptions. Some are a few lines, some are like a book, right? And you wonder yourself, well, are these the same role? They have the same title. Does this mean that they are more focused on actually their people? Do they better HR? Do they know what they want? Do they not know what they want? So you have to kind of gauge, like, what are you finding from the organization and what is it out there that's going to drive you? You might have an organization you'd love to work for, and then you get a 4-line job description and the interview process is 6 steps. You may realize this isn't the right organization for me, no matter how much I thought they were amazing. But reputation of the school, prestige of the school, their population, those are all things you probably should be thinking about and researching, because when they look at your resume or your CV, whichever you use, and they're evaluating your background experience, their bias is going to be something similar to what they already have. So recognizing that if you're in an organization where you had 50 students or 100 students for 3 years, and you go to an organization with 1,000, immediately they're biasing, right? They don't mean to, but they're looking and going, oh, they came from here. So just be aware. These are things to make sure that as you go through the process and you're picking where you're applying, that you think about it from their perspective, as well as what might they use to discount me? What might they exclude me with? What do I have to make sure my resume is reflecting to overcome that potential barrier that is maybe there, maybe not, right? But there's this unconscious bias that every human being has that we don't know. We don't know who's going to look at that resume. We don't know if it's a senior vice president of human resources, a member of the board, or a 1-year intern, right? You never know who they've got on that end. So geographic location obviously is critical, because when you're looking at international schools, and if you're going to relocate, what does that impact on your family? What do you have available geographically? What's there for the family, the children, the wife, the spouse, whatever it may be? All those things are probably influencing how you pick who you want to apply for. And then you should really reflect on, why are you targeting them? I worked with a group in the US here in one of the states, where I would go to their networking meetings once a quarter, and everybody would come to this meeting with their resume, and everybody would pass their resume around, because it was like a networking thing where, do you know somebody? And they shared all these resumes with me, and I gave my presentation on this topic. And I was baffled, because they would ask everybody, where do you want to work? And 90% of the room wanted to work at the same 3 top companies. And 90% of the room all had the same job titles. I said, do you realize you're all competing for the same 3 companies? And I'm not sure why. I said, how come none of you they're looking at the largest Fortune 50 companies? And I said, you know how many small businesses out there that not only the smaller organization will you have a larger role, have more influence, have more autonomy and authority, but you have an easier chance of getting in the door versus that company that has 1,000 applicants. When I worked with a company called Lincoln Financial Group in the US here in Pennsylvania, we had 95,000 applicants a month for our positions. 95,000. That meant out of our 50 or 60 positions a month, 90,000 plus weren't getting jobs. That's a lot, right? So some of those people should have been thinking about other types of organizations rather than a $50 billion company. But reflect on where you are in your career. Make sure you're applying for something that you feel is either you're totally capable of doing, right? You can walk into the role and be successful, or it's that next level in your career. So it's the career development, or you can do it. If it's something that's like 4 steps away and you're just taking a wild shot, be realistic about how the response is going to be. Be realistic of how you may be stuck on an interview, unable to answer questions, right? It's one thing to feel you can do it. It's another to be realistic about the qualifications. I can't believe sometimes the people who apply for positions I posted, like a $150,000 vice president role, and someone who was a cashier applied saying I'm qualified. It's like, well, what? And then they get all upset. They're the ones that call you. So anyway, making the decision, though, is really the key, right? Is it aligned with what you've done? And it doesn't have to be aligned specifically and exactly. We're going to cover transferable skills in depth on this discussion. Is it what you've always wanted to do, right? So maybe you're aligned with it. Maybe it's something you've always wanted to do. Maybe it's something new and exciting. Maybe it's a challenge. Maybe it's something different for you. All those are great influences of why you want to make a decision. I would just be careful of making a decision based on the fact that you just need a job, right? Everybody needs a job. Everybody needs to make money. Everybody needs income. Be cautious if you apply to jobs as you're not having success, applying to jobs just because you need a job. That's fine. That's fair, but it won't be what you're really trying to accomplish, right? So just know as you're making those decisions, what you're really deciding on. And we all go through that process, because nowadays it's longer and longer and longer sometimes to get any feedback, to get any response, and get anything going on. So any questions on just decision-making process? Really just to make you think about it, to know where you're headed.
Yeah.
All right. So this is the key, this is one of the key areas of this whole discussion today, and this is really what I focus a lot of time on. I want to make sure you're achieving your goal, which is going through the process. So one of the things I ask individuals to do is think about this model. So you go into an organization and they have a job posting and they start interviewing you for a position, and the applicant talks about themselves. I'm so great. I'm so wonderful. Look at everything about me. And they neglect to tie together the fact that every business or every school in this scenario is trying to accomplish the things on this slide. Okay. So they're trying to make more money, right? They increase their profits. They're trying to be best in class with their programs to attract talent, right? They're trying to have increase their productivity of their programs and curriculum and their practices, good leadership. You know, they want to build brand. They want to attract staff and students, right? To come work for them, to come to go to school there. They want to engage to grow their students. They want to engage to grow their staff. They've got to manage their money. They have to mitigate their risk and liability, right? They have to be responsible in the community. More and more, they have to be responsible to the environment as well, right? So these are all the things that that school board or that school leadership who's doing the interview cares about. This slide is just to remind an applicant that when you're answering questions, you want to be able to tie these things into your answers. You want to be able to show that you understand what they're trying to do. They're not just trying to fill a principal role. They're trying to fill a principal who understands that this is a business and this is how they make money and this is how they grow their staff. This is how they attract students. This is how they help the community, right? So your answers have to recognize that there's some mission and vision and value of the organization they're trying to reach, and you have to contribute to that, especially at these higher levels. That make sense? So this is really key in how you're articulating your responses. And when you tie things back to these concepts from a construct perspective, you already start differentiating. Your answers don't just become about you, they come about how you can help them do this, right? So it's not about what is Warren capable of, it's what can Warren bring to ABC School to help them achieve the goals that we know together they are trying to reach. When you're the candidate that discusses your responses in that context, it takes you a lot further. So we're going to go through from resume interview, right? The importance of resume articulation. Your resume, how you write that resume, and unless you use a CV, same thing, different wherever you are in the world, CVs versus resume. But that document, how you wrote it is going to be representative of how you're going to speak. So if you're poor at writing a resume, or if the resume is written like a job description, you are going to really struggle with articulating your skills and experience in an interview because you haven't really practiced how you're going to show them your value, how you're going to articulate why you're different, right? And you really have to align that resume with what you're going to say, and you have to reflect on it, and you have to practice. Anybody I coach, I say, listen, you need to talk to your friends, your family, your neighbors, anybody around you to randomly ask you these types of questions so that you are constantly thinking about how you answer them in a very intentional way. If you just say, yeah, I'm great, I wrote my resume, they're going to interview me, I'll wait till the interview, and then you go, and you really don't practice anything, you'll be viewed as being caught off guard because your questions don't come out as prepared and as smooth. So, and again, one of the things on the resume, I'll add too, right? When I say resume job description versus I'm going to cover this later in depth, but you don't want your resume to say responsible for this, responsible for that, coordinated this, tried to this. Your resume should actually demonstrate what you did and the value you added. And we're going to talk more about that in a few minutes. So how do you articulate your value, right? So the goal of the interview should be less about just lengthy dissertations. You shouldn't spend 20 minutes telling them about your last few jobs. In fact, when I interview somebody, I no longer have their resume in front of me. The resume for me is what got them the interview. And now they have to prove it. So now I don't care what they wrote on the resume. They met some screening where they met the minimum qualifications, which meant I should interview them. Then their resume made me believe that they're one of the top candidates. Great. Now I want to know about the person. So when you're interviewing, when you think about how you present yourself, I want you to remember that as of September 27th, 2023, you are a culmination of all of your work and life experience. They're not going to hire you because of what you did in 2007. They're not going to hire you because of the successful project you had in 2012. They don't care about that. They care about how are you going to bring all of those things together to today bring value as the top candidate. So when I have people, when I say, walk me through, give me 3 to 5 minutes, an overview of your background experience as it applies to this role and why you're a fit. When they start with, well, when I had a job back 12 years ago, I did this, and then 8 years ago, I did this, they're done. They're not moving forward with me because they don't understand that I'm not looking for them to tell me what I already read. I'm looking for them to present and articulate why they're valuable to me. How are they going to present when they're in front of the board? How are they going to show their experience and contributions? It's not little pieces along the way. It's all of that together gave you the knowledge and wisdom in your mind right now that allows you to be successful in the role. So the goal is to recognize, identify, and articulate verbally, and also, since it's video, your mannerisms, why the culmination of all your experience puts you in a position to be successful in the role and add value to the school. Does that make sense? It's a very different approach than people trying to like walk through the resume and justify it. And on the reverse, when you have somebody say, well, why'd you leave that job 12 years ago? Well, what'd you do? Like, it's life, man. What are you talking about? I had family, I had kids, I lost a job, I gained a job, I changed a job. Who cares? None of that matters because who you're hiring is me. You're hiring me today. So if you didn't like any of that background experience in my resume, why are you interviewing me? Right? So I find weaker HR professionals or people who don't understand how to hire top talent do all that. They'll sit in an interview and say, so tell me, Jane, why did you leave this job back 4 years ago? What motivated you to go to another? Who cares, right? Because if you think about the role you're interviewing for, that's not a qualification of the role. Why you change jobs has nothing to do with the role. Why you moved from this company doesn't have the qualification of the role. So your job through the interview as the applicant, when I say applicant control, is to try to keep them on track with your answers. If they say, tell me about yourself, don't tell them about yourself. Instead, you are giving a 3 to 5 minute overview of why you are the fit to bring value to that role, right? There's a lot of people who ask good questions. There's a lot of people who are going to ask really piss poor questions. When they ask the bad question, you have to be trained well enough to know, okay, the base of the question is this is how I'm going to answer them. And I'm going to give them more than what they asked for. So this is really key from a value perspective. And then taking value further, you should focus on demonstrating your competencies and experience, how you'll be successful in the role, right? But, how do you add to their goals? Back to that earlier slide. So if you're answering a question and you just say, I can do this versus, well, when I did this in the past, I was able to add value to our programs, which attracted more students. It's about you knowing what you did in the past. How did it impact your past organization? Right? So if I ask you, what value did you bring to the organization you worked for in the past? Well, what you did in your day-to-day role and what you did in your job and your projects and your activities, they all did something every day. But if you have to elevate beyond the task and see how you fit in adding value to the business, right, to the school. When you can show that, most applicants can't. Most applicants just say, this was my job, these were my tasks. And if you say, how did that tie in to the vision of the business? How did that tie into the success? What did you do to influence revenue? People are like, oh, I didn't sell anything. What? That's not what we're talking about, right? So understanding how it all fits at your level, Rick, right? At this higher level is going to be very valuable because very quickly, everyone around you who's also applying is going to fall by the wayside because they're not speaking the way you are. The other thing is the interviewers are not only listening to your questions, but they want to hear how you answer a question. And so we're going to get into situation, action, result. When you're answering a question, even if they don't ask a behavioral question, you want to answer in a behavioral manner so that you're saying, here's what the situation was. Here's what I did, or here's the team I led did, or here's the team I was part of did, and here's the value we added. And they start getting a sense, this interview panel, that, wow, you're thoughtful. You lay out why you're doing something. You explained what you actually did, and you understand the impact. That's a powerful answer, right? And what's funny to me is if I line up 10 people and I ask each of them what they did, They will all tell me something, and none of it is explained this way of value. And then I will restate their response, and they're like, "Oh my God, that's amazing." I go, "Yeah, but it's true, right? It's true." They go, "Yeah, it's true." Because I don't ever help tell somebody to make up lies or change their resume, right? The only thing I help people think about is, are you truly explaining what you did in a value proposition? Are you saying, I did this? Or are you saying, here was the problem, I did this to solve that problem, and the end result was this, right? That's how you want to think about the interview process and your responses. Any questions on that before I move on? Happy to answer if you have any. Nope. Okay. So culture fit. I will tell you, when we're in this world of diversity, inclusion, equity, justice, culture, all this stuff, I'll say stuff, I'll be polite. It rocks my brain when an employer will tell me, well, I'm not going to hire this person because they're not a culture fit. And I'll say, well, are you trying to hire everybody who looks and acts like you? Well, wait a minute. You tell me you want to be diverse. You tell me you want to be inclusive. You're all about diversity of thought, but this person isn't a good fit. Help me there, right? Something's wrong. So just know that organizations do bias by this thing called fit, right? They've got this mindset that like, well, they've got good experience, but look, they did this before, so they're not a fit. And they have all these internal biases they never share that also could impact this. So, if they're bringing up fit based on back experience, you want to reassure them and realign with what the role is looking for. And you want to make sure you either share or say that one of the things I bring to the organization that's valuable is my diversity of thought, is different perspective. I have the experience, I have the knowledge, I have the capability, but I'm also bringing fresh ideas, creativity, and innovation to the organization because I'm bringing other experiences with me, right? That's how you address the culture. And if they kind of push on it, like, why do you think you'd be a fit here? Again, emphasize, is your organization only hiring people that are already there? Or are you trying to hire people who are different, who represent your community, who can bring ideas of who your clients or your students or your parents are, right? Like, you want to tie that together, because being able to show that in an interview is phenomenal. When an applicant actually can say, when you say culture, you're talking about me bringing all of my diverse values to your organization, right? Oh yeah, that's great. Again, 10 applicants, you're probably the only one answering that way. And that's good, right? That's what we want to do. We want to make you think about the interview very differently, not changing your experience, not changing what you've done, not changing your qualifications, changing how you present who you are. Things you don't want to do related to culture is you don't want to imply that you've created problems in the past, or you got involved with gossips or rumor or investigations or issues. Bad situation, because they think you're just going to do that in your next role. If you did it before, you're going to do it again. The other bullet here that I really will harp on is buzzwords. Have you ever said on an interview, I'm a team player, or I'm a quick learner? Yeah. Okay. I hate that. It's horrible. So if you could come off mute for a second, Rick, I want to ask you a question. So if you've ever said team player or quick learner, pick either one of them, what did you mean by it?
I guess I meant I was, a collaborative individual, that I fostered a sense of collaboration amongst teams, because that's something that a lot of schools seem to be looking for.
So wouldn't it be better to just say all that?
Yes.
Instead of the buzzword, right?
Yeah.
Interviews create a nervousness. Interviews create a feeling of speed, fast, hurry up, and intimidation, that we go, I'm a team player, I'm collaborative, I'm a quick learner. Okay, great. The other applicant said that too. But when someone says to me, quick learner, I say, what do you mean? I go, do you mean that when you join a new organization, you're fast at adopting policies, procedures, and practices? You quickly adopt technology. You can implement and practically apply what you've learned in a pace that allows you to contribute faster than most people. Your ramp up time will be faster than other people. Yeah. So why'd you say quick learner? Right? Like you're giving yourself a missed opportunity to actually explain it. I'm going to take that further. What you just explained was kind of describing, well, I collaborate, I want to work together, they look for that, right? The best answers are stories that let them know that you do that. So you could say, I collaborate, I work well with others, or you can say, well, this question reminds me of a time there was a project where I had to collaborate with 3 other departments. There were 2 other functional areas and 1 similar area in mine. We had staff meetings. We had regular meetings to discuss our project, the scope of work. We had timelines. I made sure that we stayed on track. We had difference of opinions at times, so we had to resolve some conflict. At the end of the day, I had to influence some people through my communication skills and making sure we accomplished what we needed to. But it was a successful project overall, and we built some really great relationships. If you tell that story, you don't have to tell them you collaborate. You just described it. You demonstrated it. So when you look at your resume, does your resume say you did something, or does it demonstrate it? And then when you're answering an interview question, are you telling them, or are you proving it to them? Because most people tell. Are you a good communicator? Yeah, I'm a great communicator. Okay. X. Are you a good communicator? Let me give you an example of how I use my communication skills to influence a decision by one of my board members. Whoa, right? But here's the sad part, though. Both people have probably done the same thing. One person doesn't know how to articulate it, right? And that's the person you want to be. You want to be the one who can say it. And when if I went through your resume with you and I asked you all these questions, I would be restating things. You'd be like, well, of course I do that. And I'd say, but it doesn't say that. Well, I did this. Yeah, I know that, but it doesn't say that. So if it's not in writing, how are you going to remember to say it that way? So it's just a thinking. It's just a mindset that try to avoid a buzzword if you truly can give an example that proves you have that expertise, right? That proves you have that skill set. Now, real quick, the resume. I'm going to throw this out there because it annoys the heck out of me when people say, doesn't a resume have to be 2 pages? Mine's 5 pages long. I've met people with CVs that are PhDs in pharma. They've got 25 pages because of every article they've written and publication and whatever. So there is no minimum or maximum length of a resume that's required, or a CV. You just want to make sure that you author it in a way that's applicable, appropriate, and conveys a message. So as we all get older, imagine that, Jane, we all get older, right? Our resumes could get longer. What I do is I always keep the last 3 or 4 roles, but then I just have a section that just says prior employment. And I just list the name, company, and role. I don't put anything else. So I've got this small, short group of companies because they no longer matter. If I list something that I was a recruiter in 1997, who cares? Because I've been the chief HR officer for a pharmaceutical company. So who cares about what I did when I was a recruiter? Or they shouldn't care, right? Because we've already grown past that and doing something new. So length isn't there. SAR is critical. Your resume should be situation that you encountered. What was the action you took? What is the result or the response? People who do this really good naturally are salespeople. If you ever look at a salesperson's resume, top winner, platinum award winner, 10 million this quarter, top of the line this, ranked number 3. Like, they're so good at telling you their results, their impact. The rest of the world seems to struggle with doing it because we're taught so much that it's not about I, it's we, team. Well, my wife jokes with me about it all the time because there's no I in team, but there's I in interview, right? So when you're in an interview, you don't want to say, we did this and we did that and we did that. You can, but we're going to wonder as the interview panel, well, what was your role? What did you do? Like you said, I don't know if that's you or the rest of the team. So you want to learn to say, we did this project. My role in the team was, or here's the team that did X. I led the team, right? Make sure you give the audience context of what your role in that project was, because none of us do anything completely individually, autonomously, right? There's always some connection. But make sure you bring to light what your part was. Because if you get in the nature of we, then you run into a problem. Now, when you're in an organization, everybody wants to say we to feel inclusive. But when you're on an interview, we need to learn what you're capable of. Don't use a job description. So, for example, if you manage people, your resume shouldn't say responsible for managing a team. That doesn't tell me whether you did. That doesn't tell me you know how to. Doesn't tell me how many, doesn't tell me if it was successful, doesn't tell me you knew how to set goals, meet expectations, issue corrective action, develop professionals. I mean, make sure it's not a job description. Make sure it purely is what you've done. I'd be cautious in including dates of education. Depends on the country you're in and the types of regulations, or whether or not people are going to discriminate against somebody who's older. but there's generally no reason to include it. I joke around where I'll say, well, have you ever seen a job posting that said, I want a master's degree in education from 1996? No, you just see, we want a master's degree, right? We want this degree, that degree. They don't care about the year you got it because that's not relevant. So there's no value then in adding the date of education on a resume. It only allows them to quickly determine how old you are. And that's not what we want people focused on. We don't want them focused on your age. We want them focused on your capabilities. In some countries and some organizations I've been around, people would list like what they're a member of, associations they're with, clubs. This can be very positive or negative. If you happen to submit your resume to a hiring manager who doesn't like the association or the religious group or the church you're a member of, you might get biased and eliminated without even knowing why. So if you think about these memberships or associations or different things you might want to share, it's sometimes better to say, I volunteer my time in the community doing blah, blah, blah. Highlight what you do is more important than who you did it for. Just think about that. Now, I don't know in a lot of other countries if it's such a big deal because the US is the country that discriminates the most and they treat people like crap. But, I've had people list like Boy Scouts and not get hired because the person hated the Boy Scouts and had nothing to do with their qualifications. I've had employers where I've had to fire managers because they looked at their address and they said they come from a bad part of town. I'm like, what? Wait, what? Like ridiculous stuff. So, I think this country is ridiculous in that aspect when how they focus on it sometimes. But I used to work with the UK a lot when I was with GlaxoSmithKline, and our head of HR came across the water, right? Came across the ocean and said, what is this discrimination stuff? It makes no sense to me. Like, why would you mistreat somebody? I'm like, welcome to the United States, right? Like, that's how it works here. So those things could or could not be a problem. Your resume should have some kind of summary objective. If you're applying for headmaster, if you're applying for principal, if you're applying for these roles, you want to highlight, either summarize your experience so that when they read the very top of the resume, when they do a quick review, it quickly aligns. Wow, that kind of matches what we need. Boom, keep going. Or you say, looking to do blah, blah. You set an objective of looking to advance my career by blah, 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 and becoming a principal, becoming a headmaster. Just make sure that, to me, it's better to do a summary than objective, because if you apply to multiple schools or multiple jobs and they have different titles, you may look like you're all over the place, right? Or you have to have like 12 different versions of your resume, right? And that's a lot of work. So to cut down the work, I recommend summary. It's not a great idea, and depends on what they want up front, to list references right off the bat, because telling an employer, call me for my references, forces interaction. So if you give them everything up front and they don't have any interest in you, they might have interest in one of your references, because most people list someone at a higher level than them as a reference. So I've used that as a recruiting tool. I would go, wow, this person can't do the job, but their reference was their manager. I bet they can. Let me go hire them. So there's a lot of positives around why you shouldn't do that. Force interaction, make them ask for it. Because if they're asking for references, it should indicate that you're moving forward in the process. This next bullet about duplication and increased mastery. So if you were in a school and you were a teacher, and then you were a teacher of 2 areas, and then you became in charge of a program, and then you developed the curriculum, and then you became team lead of something, and then you became management, and then you became an assistant principal. The assistant principal activities on the resume should not be anywhere near the same activities as that first teaching job. So don't waste space on your resume repeating skills, because the assumption is you are doing something more complex of more value at each level. And so, for example, I'll give you an HR example. So if I'm a recruiter and then I go to another job and I was a senior recruiter, and I went to another job and I was a manager of recruiting, and then I went to another job and I was director of recruiting, my director of recruiting role shouldn't say review resume, because I would have done that at the earliest point of my career in that function. So really make sure that when you look at your resume, each level, the tasks reflect the complexity and the value you delivered at that level. You shouldn't be repeating through that. If you have gaps in your resume, I recommend filling them, even if you write unemployed, homemaker, caregiver, going to school, whatever it is. When someone's looking at the resume, having the gaps there versus having it filled with something is a great strategy and tactic to not get held up. First of all, if they looked at it, saw it, and moved you forward, the question shouldn't come up in the interview because someone was already okay with it because they're like, oh, yeah, he was unemployed or he was going to school or whatever. But when you leave gaps, it just raises questions, and it actually can eliminate somebody because they go, well, this person wasn't even willing to tell us what they were doing for this year and a half. Or were they locked up? Like, what's going on? What happened? So avoid gaps. Never misrepresent on your resume. It's a bad thing to do because then you can't live up to it. And a lot of organizations will actually terminate you if they find out that you lied on an application or resume. And as mentioned earlier, if you're in an applicant tracking system and you're going through that process, make sure you fill out everything on that application and then attach the resume. Don't just write "see resume" because some organizations will not look at the resume until the application's filled out. Alrighty, so strategies for the interview itself. 2 types of interview styles, okay? And let me know if time's running out for you because I will continue as long as you're willing to make sure you get all your questions answered. But traditional interviews are focused on hypothetical situations, some cognitive questions, maybe some personality stuff. They might do personality testing, all that kind of craziness. But hypothetical situations and things like that generally don't produce the best answers. And so if I simply said, what would you do if we hired you as headmaster? I don't learn anything from that because I can ask any human being on the planet that same hypothetical question and get a hypothetical answer. Right? And cognitive things or traditional might be, tell me your strengths, tell me your weaknesses. And there's definitely ways to answer that. But the style that is more effective nowadays, more organizations use it. And from an IO psychologist perspective, this is what we really focus on. Behavioral interviews are used because in all things in life, they always say past performance is not indicative of the future, right? Whatever happened in the past doesn't tell you what's going to happen in the future. We believe as IO psychologists, work behavior is extremely indicative of future work behavior. So if you took on extra work, if you engaged well, if you collaborated in your last job, you're probably going to do the same things in the new job, right? And even better. But when you're asking questions, or especially when you're answering questions, this is how it should be asked and this is how you should answer it. So if someone said, how would you? Instead, you should say, this is how I did. If I said, give me an example of when you dealt with an irate parent, right? Now I'm not asking how would you do it? I'm asking how did you do it? All right. So be prepared to actually explain what was the situation. Well, the parent came in, they were very angry. They thought their student, What did you do about it? And then what was the resolution? That allows you to truly give them a picture of how you handle situations. Just like if someone were to ask me, not a behavioral question, they ask it traditionally, do you communicate well? I wouldn't say yes. I would give an answer that would talk about how do I influence others through communication to accomplish a goal. So behavioral questions are really defined differently. Some techniques when you're on these interviews and going through it is eye contact. If you're in person, eye contact to multiple people. Eye contact on video is nearly impossible. I mean, I keep looking at your guys' pictures, realizing I'm not looking straight, right? But the way to get around that is to make sure during the interview, use their names. So if John Doe asks you a question and you've got Mary and Tina on the call, when you respond, use other people's names as well. Well, thank you so much. Well, Tina, this might apply really to you. Well, Jane, this is going to be really good for you. Well, this is right. Include everybody because you can't look at them. You can't see all their mannerisms. One of the great strategies to involve them is that name, using their name directly, and people like that. If you're not sure about a question and your answer is not coming right away, ask them to repeat the question. There's nothing wrong with saying, can you repeat that? It sounds like a 2-part question. Can you repeat the question and take notes? Like you are, Rick, right? Take notes. It's good to take notes. Write down the question, break it down. Make sure if there's a 3-part question, you take time to answer 3 parts. It should never be a problem. Anytime I've had somebody say, why are you taking notes? I say, well, you're taking notes of my answers. Why can't I take notes of the questions, right? Incorporate other experiences. So if someone were to say to you, do you know how to use Microsoft Excel? You go, yeah. Well, nobody learned anything. But if they say, do you know how to use Microsoft Excel? And you say, well, as a matter of fact, I had a recent project where we were trying to understand the retention rates of our teachers. And so I created a spreadsheet in which we were tracking the retention rates, the reasons, we did some analysis, and ultimately I presented that report to the board. Well, you told them you know how to use Excel, but you might be the only candidate that also demonstrated working with the board, doing data analysis, solving a problem with that tool. So KSAOs are knowledge, skills, abilities, and other characteristics. You want to bring other things into all of your answers, because if you can expand on it by storytelling facts about your career, facts about your experience, you will differentiate from the other applicants. And another thing, if you go on tangents, if you have a habit of like talking a lot, getting diarrhea of the mouth, as I call it, right? You want to make sure that you stay focused. Video interviews are great because you can put little stickies around your monitor that say, don't go on a tangent, shut up, stop talking, right? But one way to really address this, if you know it of yourself that you go on tangents, when you answer a question, ask the panel or the interviewer, did I answer your question? Or would you like me to explain more? It's a great technique, especially if it's a complicated question or it's a complex topic, or there's a lot of information that you could potentially share. But remember, you only have so much time in an interview. You only have so many questions they're going to ask. And if you spend too much time on one question, they may not even get to another one. So when you respond and you feel like you've answered the question, ask them, did I answer your question, or would you like me to share more? If they say, oh, no, you answered my question, great, you're done, win, boom, move to the next one. If they say, no, please share more, it doesn't necessarily mean you didn't answer the question. It just means they're interested, right? So now you've got dialogue. So really good approach. If you're on video and you're video interviewing, be very aware of your background. You've blurred yours out, which is great. Be careful of your background. Make sure your camera distance. I bounce around a lot because when I talk, I just bounce around. But you want to make sure your distance from the camera is good and pretty stable, that you have good posture and your mannerisms are good. I had somebody that did this a lot. Like when they talked, that's bad. So, you know, a lot of us talk with our hands, but, you know, keep them down or have something, maybe hold a pen or hold something so that you're not in the camera. Feel free to use notes and cue cards and dress appropriately. I've interviewed people who showed up in their pajamas. They said, well, we work from home, right? What's the big deal? And I'm like, great. And always test the technology. If you ever have a Microsoft Teams meeting, oh my God, always check ahead of time. Microsoft Teams is constantly updating, and then you'll be late for your interview. But go in, if it's something you haven't used recently, at least load the system, see if there's any updates so that you're not late for your interview or have problems. So 2 things specifically I want to talk about here, hopefully you still have time to stay, is leadership skills that they're going to ask about and how you articulate them, and transferable skills, things that you run into when you might not specifically have done what they're asking. So from a leadership perspective, when you're answering questions, if you truly want to articulate and demonstrate you have leadership experience, you should be able to discuss systems that you worked on. You should be able to discuss the operations of your organization and how the people all interact. You shouldn't be siloed where you can't talk holistically about how everything in the school works together. How does admissions work with finance? How do the staff work with curriculum? How does the principal, like all those things, you should be able to articulate the tools, the systems, and the processes so that you can show this is how we all work together. And you should be able to define, how does the school make money? What do we do to make money? What will we do that would lose money? What do we do that retains? All those things, they're going to look for anyone who says they're a leader in a school. They're going to say, okay, well, then you should know these things. You don't have to know how they do it. You just have to know how these things work. Articulate that you understand in your last role, your prior career, right? Whatever you've done, that you understand these things. And you want to make sure that you can clearly define things that you do that are tactical versus strategic. If everything you explain in an interview comes across very tactical, I executed this, I did this, versus I set the goals and I had the team, I assigned a project out, I created a vision for this. If you weren't the one driving it and other people were doing it, then you were more tactical than strategic, and you might not be the leader they're looking for. Make sense? Okay. Transferable skills is kind of, getting close to wrapping this up. So we all haven't done everything in our career, right? We all haven't been able to do everything we'd like to do or everything that's out there. And so transferable skills are things that the employer is looking for that you've learned through school, work, or life experiences. These things that you should be able to articulate will cover their question. So if someone says, have you ever used ABC software? And you go, well, wait a minute, that's just a finance software, right? Yes, I've used 3 different finance softwares. I could certainly learn and adapt to learn a new one. Right? Oh, well, we have a different type of people here. We have different type of performance review. Well, I've done performance management, I've done leadership, I've done training, I've done this. So yes, I've done that. These are examples of things that are very transferable that you should consider and think about when if they were to ask you a question of some very specific thing related to their organization, and you haven't done that specific thing, something on this list usually will help you show that you've done something similar, but not exact, that still relates and still makes you qualified for the role. Does that make sense? Because a lot of people struggle with transferable skills. They get in an interview and they immediately go, no, I don't know how to do that. And I'm thinking, well, I know you did these other things before, so why aren't you telling me how you'd be able to do it now? So transferable skills are really okay. When you close the interview, you want to make sure you take an opportunity to ask questions. This is your chance, and I've never seen an interview where the interview panel didn't say, do you have any questions for us? Here's a really good strategy and a trick. You've been taking notes during the session, right? So they will see that you're taking notes. When they say, do you have any questions for us? You say, as a matter of fact, I do. And this is what I do. I kind of pick up my notepad and I go, hold on. I turn the pages to where I wrote my list of questions, and I actually prepare a list of questions. But then here's the trick. I say, okay, well, this one, oh, Jane already answered that question. And then Rick, you already took care of that one. Let me see. Oh, here's my first question. I cannot tell you the ego you just stroked of that interview team, where they feel so amazing that they've already answered your questions somehow magically. Whether they did or didn't, they feel amazing. And now you go into your questions and ask good questions. Not, why do you work here? Why do you work here? Do you like working there? Ask things you really want to know about. What is the greatest challenge this position is going to face in the next 12 months? Do you have a strategic plan for the retention issues that you're facing? Like real questions. How effective is collaboration in your organization? And what obstacles am I going to come across, right? Because your questions are also things you're showing them that differentiate you from the other candidates. If you ask really thoughtful, intentional questions, it raises the bar. And then this bullet here, how'd you do? I don't know why people would call me and say, hey, I just finished my interview. How'd I do? And I go, I don't know. I wasn't there. Weren't you there? Yeah. Don't be afraid to ask how you did during the interview, but it's how you ask it. And it's making sure you understand that you're not asking if you're getting the job. You're asking for feedback on how you did, because you may have to interview other places. You may be interviewing again in the future, or they may have 100 candidates and someone might have more experience than you. That's just a fact. So you want to know, how did you do in the interview? And this is how I recommend asking it. From what we've discussed so far today, is there anything that would prevent me from moving forward in the process? Right? So from what we've discussed so far today, is there anything that would prevent me from moving forward in the process? Now, I talked about behavioral interviews being very open-ended. This is designed, from the last 15 years I've been doing this, in developing these questions, on purpose, yes or no. So if they say, no, there's nothing that would prevent you from moving forward, you immediately say, great, what are next steps and when can we schedule it? You take control, because they just told you there's nothing holding you back, so let's move. Sometimes they'll say, yeah, as a matter of fact, the fourth question we asked you, we didn't really get a good answer on that. Take that opportunity to add to your answer. Don't ask them if you can, just do it. Oh, well, maybe I wasn't clear when I answered that earlier. Let me give you another example. I've literally had people win me over and win the interview because they didn't explain enough. They misheard the question. They were too nervous, whatever. The other thing is, sometimes you'll ask an interview panel, how did I do? And they're afraid to answer you. They don't think they're allowed to tell you. So in that situation, you have to just say to them, I'm not looking to know whether or not I'm getting the job. I know there's other interviews. I know there's other processes. Just want feedback on this interview. Did I answer your questions effectively? Make it a conversation and make it human, right? I'm just looking for feedback because I know everybody is so busy in this day and age. It's probably going to be hard for me to get feedback later. So I appreciate if I could have that feedback now. If you're in person, obviously get contact information, business cards, all that. In an online environment, you want to just thank them again for their time and appreciate it. But you do want to send that thank you letter. And so even if you only have an email address of one person and you met 4 people, make sure you send that, you address that email to the person you have the email address for and all the other people. And even if you know the information for 4 people or 3 people of a panel, don't send different emails to 3 different people. They compare them. They show them to each other. They'd be like, why? It seems like you liked you. He didn't like me. What happened? Right? So send it And it should be short and sweet. Thank you for your time. I believe I'm a great fit for this opportunity. I'm interested and available. You can reach me by phone. Here's my DNA. Here's my phone. Here's my WhatsApp. Here's my, as many ways as you can tell them to contact you, right? You're interested. Here's how you get me. So, and then always thank them at the beginning and thank them for their time. Offer process. I quickly just give you this offer process here because then we wrapped it up. So generally there's multiple stages for the offer. Generally there's a verbal process and then they kind of put it in writing. Have you had that happen to you where you kind of, they call you and tell you the offer and then they send you their contract or whatever it is? Okay. So view it as the verbal offer is where they're trying to get the negotiation out of the way, which is a smart way to do it. If I send you an offer and suddenly you want more money, you want more time off, you want more of this, more of that, I'm rewriting the offer, you're reviewing it, I'm reviewing it, it becomes crazy. Instead, the verbal gives you that opportunity to kind of say where you're at. Understand that when you go through that process, know your value. From the first step to the end, don't waver on what you're looking for compensation. Don't waver on a sign-on bonus. Don't waver on how much time off. Don't waver on any perks or benefits, right? Ask for what you feel your value is. If they were to ask you, what are you looking for? How much are you looking for? I never give them a number first. I always tell that interview panel, why don't you, if you're interested in hiring me, why don't you move forward by putting your best foot forward? Give me your best offer. You give me your best offer, I'll give you my best answer, right? So let them try to make the first move before you give, because the moment you give a number, they know where you're at, right? And you usually can't go up, right? They think somebody's a little ridiculous if they try to keep going up after they give a number. And some people say, well, I went and talked to my spouse, or I looked at where I'm going to live and I need more. You should have already done that research. You got to know your value at the beginning. Be consistent, stick with it, and then know their strategies. In some organizations, they would rather give a sign-on bonus or money up front that cost them once than add to the base compensation or add to that contract. And also, if it's a really good contract or a really good opportunity, see if you can negotiate it longer if you want. If they say, we only do 1 year contracts, say why. If I'm the right fit for you, it's going to take me longer than 1 year to implement all these changes, right? I mean, that's part of the problem with the retention and turnover in the schools at times. So that's the kind of the offer process there. And that's what we've got for you today. So thank you for staying on for a few extra minutes. But questions and answers, this is an upcoming webinar next week for the business side of the house. But from a questions perspective, floor is yours. I'll answer anything you'd like to ask.
Okay. Well, first of all, thank you very much, Warren.
Yeah.
It's extremely thorough.